and subscribe.
And now, it's story time.
In the heart of every hospital, there exists a realm unlike any other, a place where the line between life and death is blurred. The Intensive Care Unit, ICU, is where humanity's most vulnerable moments unfold. Here, the relentless hum of life-saving machines, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the subtle but ever-present tension in the air create an environment unlike any other. It is a place where every breath counts, every heartbeat is measured, and where the unpredictable nature of existence becomes impossible to ignore. For ICU nurses, this environment is both a battlefield and a sanctuary. It's a world they navigate with unparalleled skill, compassion, and expertise. They are the professionals who face trauma, illness, and death daily, witnessing the rawest emotions of patients and their families. But as seasoned as they are, even the most experienced nurses will tell you, there are things that go beyond the scope of medicine. Sometimes, in the midst of all the life-saving efforts and frantic pace, there are moments that defy explanation. This video is a collection of real-life accounts from ICU nurses who have encountered unexplainable events during their careers. Their stories are not of mere medical anomalies, but of eerie, haunting, and terrifying experiences that linger long after the patient has left the unit. As the video unfolds, you'll hear of strange happenings that cannot be chalked up to stress or fatigue, instances that push the boundaries of belief. This isn't just about the triumphs and challenges of nursing. It's about the unknown, the eerie, and the unsettling moments that slip through the cracks of science and logic. Some of the nurses who've experienced these events have even questioned their own sanity, yet the stories persist. So, as you watch, prepare to rethink the quiet, seemingly mundane night shifts and the shadowy corners of hospitals you've never given a second thought to. It was one of those early shifts when the night had just turned to morning and the ICU was quiet, too quiet. The soft beep of the machines, the occasional shuffle of footsteps in the hallway, and the low hum of the air conditioning filled the air. But otherwise, the hospital felt almost empty. I was at the nurses' station, going through my reports for the night when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me from exhaustion. It was faint, almost a whisper, a baby's cry, soft, distant, but unmistakable. I paused, trying to place the sound. It wasn't the typical noise you'd expect in an ICU. There weren't any babies in the ward, not at this hour. It was all elderly patients, adults suffering from critical conditions, and yet the cry lingered, growing slightly louder as if it was coming from just down the hall. I stood up quickly, my heart racing. I followed the sound down the dim corridor, each step feeling heavier than the last. The sound led me to room 312, a room that had been empty for days. Nothing but a quiet bed with no one inside. I opened the door, heart in my throat, and walked in, scanning the room quickly. No baby. No sign of life other than the usual hospital equipment. No crying either. The room was eerily silent. I stood there for a moment, waiting. The silence felt almost too much. I checked the chart for the room. There were no infants listed as patients in that space. It didn't make sense. But the cry was still fresh in my mind, echoing in my ears. I stepped back out into the hallway, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I just imagined it. Exhaustion, stress, maybe even a bit of a sensory overload. But then I remembered something. There had been a rumor circulating among the staff for months. It had started as a whispered comment in the break room, a nurse mentioning that she'd heard a baby crying late one night. She thought she'd been hallucinating, maybe just tired after a long shift. But others began to share similar stories. Voices of babies crying, soft and distant in the dead of night when the ward was meant to be silent. I couldn't help but feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was impossible, yet it felt so real. I decided to ask around to find out if anyone had heard it too. The more I spoke with the staff, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one. Several nurses had heard the same sound at various hours, always in the same part of the ICU. Then, one of the senior nurses who'd worked here for years mentioned something that chilled me. She told me that months ago, a baby had been brought in, critical and struggling to survive. Despite everyone's best efforts, the baby passed away in that very room. It had been a tragic case, and the family had gone through unimaginable grief. Ever since that night, she said quietly, people have heard the crying. I don't know if it's just stress or something else, but I've heard it myself. Sometimes it's louder, other times softer, but it's always there. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The crying sound, the empty room, the unsettling feeling that lingered. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was there. Something had left a mark. And maybe it wasn't just the hospital, but the echoes of life that had once struggled in that very space, refusing to fade. Later that week, I went back to room 312 just to check again. The door creaked as I entered, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard it. The faint cry, the soft, broken sound of a baby calling out. But when I walked in, there was only silence. Only the sterile, cold walls of the room that had witnessed so much suffering and loss. In the ICU, we're used to sounds. Machines beeping, the quiet murmurs of conversations, and the occasional groan or sigh from a patient. But some sounds don't belong. They don't make sense. And yet sometimes they seem to linger long after the body is gone. Echoes from the past, from lives that were lost, from struggles that no one can forget. We dismiss these things. After all, it's easier to chalk it up to stress or exhaustion or even a trick of the mind. But in those quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, I can't help but wonder, what if those sounds are not just our minds playing tricks? What if they are truly echoes, lingering around the space where life once fought to survive, where the faintest cry still refuses to fade? Hello friends, thank you for watching. A special shout out to our subscribers. You keep these eerie stories alive. But here's the thing, only 30% of viewers are subscribed. If you enjoy our content, hitting subscribe helps us more than you know. It takes a second, but makes a huge difference. While you're at it, like and share to keep the chills coming. Thanks again, you made this possible. See you in the next one, if you dare. I was fresh out of training when I took a position in a new ICU. The kind of job that would challenge my skills, stretch my patience, and test my endurance. I'd heard the usual stories from the other nurses, ghost tales that seemed to make their rounds with every new staff member. They were always shared in whispers around coffee breaks or when the unit was quieter than usual. But there was one story that kept coming up, one that I couldn't shake. It was about a former nurse, Megan, who had worked in the ICU many years ago. She was well-liked, a veteran in the field until one tragic night. She died in a car accident while on duty, rushing to get back after a long shift. They said she was still in her scrubs when the accident happened. The news hit hard, especially in a tight-knit unit like ours. But the part that haunted the staff wasn't just the accident. It was the belief that her ghost lingered. The rumors said she had unfinished business, and some nurses even claimed to have seen her in the halls late at night. Some said her ghost walked the ICU, visiting rooms, sometimes offering comfort to patients, other times warning those who worked there. I didn't believe in that kind of thing, not really. I was just focused on doing my job, getting settled into the rhythm of the unit, learning from my colleagues, and putting in the long hours. But then, something happened that made me question everything. It was a particularly quiet night shift. I was working alone in the back office, catching up on charts and making notes. The hospital was mostly still, patients asleep, nurses and doctors busy in their respective departments. It was a good time to finish some administrative tasks, but my peace didn't last long. I felt the vibration of my pager. At first, I didn't think much of it. These things were notorious for malfunctioning. But then, when I glanced down at the screen, I froze. The message was short, but it was unmistakable. It read, "Is your mother okay? I'm here." I blinked, looking at it again. My heart skipped a beat. How did anyone know about my mother? She had passed away just a few weeks ago. The hospital staff had been sympathetic, but this was too specific, too personal. I quickly dismissed it, telling myself it must have been some glitch in the system, some random text that had been sent to the wrong pager. But then another message came through. This time, it was even more unsettling. "You're in room 305, the same place I was." Room 305, my assigned room for the night. I'd been working in that room for hours, monitoring a patient who was stable but critical. I hadn't spoken to anyone about my assignment, and the messages, well, they kept coming. "Don't be afraid, I'm just checking on you, they'll understand soon." My blood ran cold. I couldn't explain it. I thought I was imagining things, maybe still overwhelmed by grief. But no matter how many times I checked the pager or tried to turn it off, the messages kept coming. They were written with an urgency, as if whoever was sending them knew something I didn't. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out into the hallway, my mind racing. I asked one of the senior nurses, a woman who had been working here for years, if she knew anything about the stories surrounding Megan. Her face grew serious as she looked at me. "Oh, Megan, she worked in room 305, she said quietly. "That was her last shift. She passed away that night, on her way back after her shift ended. Some of us believe her spirit never left this unit. She was a good nurse. She cared deeply about her patients. Maybe she still does." I felt my heart drop. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as the nurse continued. "We hear things sometimes. Messages, whispers. Nurses who have worked here long enough have all experienced it. Megan never really left. She stays in this unit, watching over us." I was in shock. I had been working in the same room where she died, and the messages on my pager were becoming harder to dismiss. Was it really her? Was it possible that Megan's spirit was trying to communicate with me? The next few nights, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't like someone was physically there. It was more like a presence, a weight in the air. And every time I entered room 305, I felt it. The air seemed just a little colder. The silence was a little heavier. It was as if Megan was still there, still watching over the room where she had last worked. Somewhere deep inside me, I knew. The messages on my pager weren't a coincidence. Megan's ghost was still lingering in the ICU, trying to reach out. Maybe she had unfinished business. Maybe she just wanted to let someone know that she was still here, still a part of this place. And maybe, just maybe, she was trying to comfort me in the only way she knew how. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't alone in my experiences. Other nurses had felt it too. Those quiet, unexplainable moments where you felt the presence of someone who wasn't there. I wasn't the only one to receive strange messages or hear things at night. And I wasn't the only one who had ever felt the deep, unsettling sensation that a former nurse was still watching over the ICU, guarding the patients and staff in her own quiet way. After that, every time I entered room 305, I couldn't help but wonder if Megan was still there, still working, still caring, even in death. Her spirit might never have fully moved on, but somehow I didn't mind. It was as if she had become part of the ICU itself, a part of the hospital's soul that would never truly fade. And whenever my pager buzzed, I would smile quietly to myself. I knew it wasn't a malfunction. It was Megan, still looking out for us all. Hey, you made it this far, but the story isn't over. The shadows still whisper, and the truth is buried deeper than you think. If you stop now, you'll never know what lurks just beyond the next click. The next story awaits. Watch it now before it watches you. There are patients who come and go, people who pass through our care and their presence is felt, but they don't always leave an impression. But then there are those patients, the ones that you can't shake, no matter how hard you try. I remember one such patient clearly. Her name was Mrs. Harris. She had been in the ICU for a few weeks, and to anyone else, she seemed like just another elderly woman struggling with her health. But to me, there was something different about her. Every time I checked on her, she would be lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling. Her eyes never blinked, never moved. It wasn't just the stillness that got to me. It was the intensity of her gaze. It was like she was seeing something that wasn't there, something none of us could see. She didn't speak. She didn't make a sound. But somehow, when I would approach her, she would shift her eyes, looking at me with such clarity, as if she was fully aware of everything that was going on. I'd try to talk to her, ask if she needed anything, but she would never respond. It wasn't that she was unresponsive. No, she would raise an eyebrow or slightly move her fingers in a way that made me feel she was trying to communicate. But still, she didn't speak. She just watched. Watched the ceiling with such focus, as if something was happening there that I couldn't understand. One night, I was assigned to her care. The ICU was quiet. The night shift always has that stillness to it. Most of the patients were asleep, and the hospital seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the machines. But Mrs. Harris, she was wide awake as usual. Her eyes locked onto the ceiling, unmoving. I felt uneasy. There was something in her gaze that felt almost unnatural. I glanced at the ceiling, but of course there was nothing there. Just the usual fluorescent lights, the quiet hum of the machines above her. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was staring at someone that wasn't in the room. My heart started to race. I tried to dismiss the thought, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, it was a long shift, and maybe the exhaustion was getting to me. I checked her vitals, made sure everything was in place, and started to walk out of the room. But just before I left, I turned back to look at her once more. Her gaze hadn't moved. But then, something strange happened. Her eyes slowly shifted to meet mine, and for the briefest moment, it felt like she was trying to tell me something. Not with words, but with that intense, unwavering stare. I felt a chill run through me. It was as if her eyes were saying, "I'm not just looking at the ceiling, I'm watching something else." I couldn't explain it. I'd seen many patients over the years, but this was different. I had a feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. I didn't know what she was looking at or who she was looking for, but I couldn't deny that there was something beyond the physical world in that room with her. Hours later, as the night wound down, I returned to her room to check on her again. I found her still in the same position, eyes locked on the ceiling. The machines around her were quiet, and the room felt heavier than usual. But there was no movement, no blinking, no sound. Mrs. Harris was still, as if frozen in time. I stayed there for a moment, watching her. Then I stepped out to update the nurse's log, and that's when I was told. Mrs. Harris had passed away just hours after I had left her room. I didn't know how to process it. But what disturbed me most was when the staff confirmed that she had not moved, blinked, or spoken the entire time she was in the room. Not once, not even when I was there. It was as if she had been holding on to something, waiting for something, and when it finally came, she let go. It wasn't the fact that she had passed that left me unsettled. It was the way she had been watching, as if she were waiting for someone or something that no one else could see. Some patients linger in strange ways, as if they are in a trance, caught between worlds. I've always wondered, especially after that night, if Mrs. Harris was really watching the ceiling, or if she was watching something beyond our comprehension. Maybe she was waiting for someone to arrive, or maybe she was looking at something far more important than any of us could ever understand. But I'll never forget her. The way she watched, the way she seemed to be waiting for something unseen. It was as if, in those last moments, she knew something that we couldn't. Maybe we're not as alone as we think. Maybe some things, some presences, are always watching. The hospital can be a quiet place after the rush of the day. I had just finished my shift, exhausted from running around and trying to keep everything in order. It was one of those nights when everything felt heavier than usual. The kind of shift where your body feels like it's moving on autopilot. I had just finished checking on all my patients and was sitting in the break room, trying to relax for a moment before heading home. The night was still. There was no sound except for the occasional beeping of machines down the hallway. It was almost eerie how peaceful it was for that time of night. I got up from the chair, ready to finish the last of my rounds before clocking out. I had to check on room 305. As I walked through the hallway, I passed empty rooms and dimmed lights. I reached the door of room 305, where an elderly man had been resting quietly for the past few days. He had been a bit unresponsive lately, but nothing had seemed alarming, just the slow process of aging. I opened the door quietly, not wanting to disturb him, but as soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. It wasn't the room itself. The machines were still humming quietly. The air felt still but not unpleasant. What caught me off guard was this sudden sensation, this odd feeling, almost like someone was standing too close behind me. I brushed it off as fatigue, thinking maybe I was just too tired after the long night. But then I felt it, a coldness, an icy sensation, like a hand, cold as ice, gently resting on my shoulder. My breath caught in my throat. I froze for a second, thinking I was imagining it, but the coldness stayed. It wasn't a draft, it wasn't something explainable. It felt like a real hand, a solid, unyielding pressure that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. No one was there. I looked around again. The man on the bed was still there, lying in his usual position, peaceful, though he seemed a little more still than before. But there was no one else in the room. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I could still feel the cold spot on my shoulder, almost like it had sunk into my skin. I raised my hand to touch the spot, but it felt wrong. It felt colder than the rest of my body, like something wasn't quite right. I didn't know what to make of it. It was too real to ignore, yet there was no explanation. The night continued and I finished my rounds, but I couldn't shake the sensation. It lingered with me, that icy touch that wouldn't leave. The spot on my shoulder stayed cold for hours, well into my drive home. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, as I came in for my shift, I overheard one of the doctors speaking to the family. I wasn't supposed to be eavesdropping, but I overheard the words that made my stomach twist. The patient in room 305, the one I'd just checked on, had passed away peacefully that night, just after my shift had ended. I didn't know what to think. The cold touch, the unexplainable sensation, it all started to make sense, but it didn't make me feel any better. Some part of me wanted to believe it was just fatigue or stress from a long night, but deep down, I knew it was something else. The sensation didn't go away. It stayed with me for days. It was as if whatever that presence was had left a trace, something that couldn't be explained by the physical world. It lingered, like a reminder that some things go beyond what we can see and touch. The body might not feel the presence of the deceased, but certain sensations, some of them seem to transcend the physical. They stay, even after the pulse has stopped. And sometimes they don't just disappear, they linger, quietly until you can't help but remember. It was like any other busy day. The patients, the routines, the constant flow of tasks. I was used to it by now. The rhythm of the ICU, the constant beeping of monitors, the quiet murmurs of doctors and nurses passing by. Everything felt normal, and everything felt predictable. I was finishing up my rounds when I glanced at the clock. It was nearly time for my shift to end. The last stretch always felt like the hardest. Everyone was getting tired, running low on energy, and the hospital, in a strange way, felt like it was holding its breath as we all awaited the shift change. As the minutes passed, I wrapped up my final tasks, double-checked patient records, and prepared to leave. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a steady glow over everything, and the hum of machines filled the background. I grabbed my bag, waved to the other nurses, and made my way toward the exit. It was the usual routine, nothing special, until I walked out of the ICU doors. That's when the odd sensation hit. It was like an unsettling feeling, a quiet nagging in the back of my mind, but but I couldn't place why. The moment I closed the door behind me and stepped out into the cool night air, the feeling only deepened. It was as if something wasn't quite right. It was that same sensation you get when you forget whether you locked the door or not, but more intense, as if a piece of reality had been disconnected. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was just tired. After all, I had been working for hours on end. But as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I couldn't stop replaying those last moments of my shift. I couldn't remember leaving. I couldn't remember the last hour of the night, the moments leading up to me walking out. It was like a part of my life had vanished into thin air. I pushed it to the back of my mind as best as I could, chalking it up to exhaustion. But when I walked into the break room the next morning, everything came rushing back. The conversation, the small talk with my colleagues, it all felt like it happened in a parallel universe. They talked like it was just another day. They spoke as if nothing had changed. But for me, it was different. The last hour of my shift didn't feel like it had happened at all. I tried asking around, but no one seemed concerned. No one seemed to notice anything was amiss. You left when your shift was over, just like you always do, they told me, as though it was the most normal thing in the world. But I knew it wasn't normal. I knew something had happened, and though I couldn't quite put my finger on it, I couldn't shake the feeling that time had stretched and warped in those lost moments. Was it fatigue, stress, or was something else going on? It felt like my own perception of time had betrayed me, leaving me questioning not just the last few hours of my shift, but the very nature of reality itself. Time moves differently in the ICU. Time is distorted, and sometimes even the most experienced nurses, people who've seen it all, can't make sense of the moments that slip away unnoticed. We can't always explain what happens, and sometimes we don't even want to know. All we can do is try to get through it. But the next time you lose track of time or feel like something's missing, remember, in places like the ICU, reality doesn't always work the way we expect it to.
In addition, YouTube's algorithm prioritizes videos with many likes and subscriptions. So, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe buttons to help more people see and know about this content. Thank you for watching and listening.